Welcome to Veritate with your host, Johnny Mack, a podcast that will dive deep into the pursuit of truth in a world filled with noise, confusion, and fleeting opinions. We will seek to uncover the eternal, unshakable truths that shape our lives and our beliefs, from faith and philosophy to history and culture. We'll explore the questions that matter, challenge the answers we've been given, and seek the wisdom that has stood the test of time. So join Johnny Mack in this journey to discover what's real, what's right, and what's true.
You know, I used to think that happiness was the point. Everything I did, every plan, every pursuit was always aimed at that feeling. And if I could just get there, if I could just be happy, then life would make sense. You know, I thought if I worked hard enough, if I earned enough, if I built enough, I'd finally feel complete. But that was the lie. Because every time I reached one goal, another one would appear just right beyond it. Every single time I ever tasted success, every time I got promoted, every single time something good would happen, the taste would then fade. And happiness never stayed with me. And what I learned is when you live without God, happiness becomes your God. Because it's all you have left to chase. Because what you wind up doing is you worship comfort, you avoid pain, and you start to measure your worth by how good things feel. And that was me. That was the practical atheist. If something felt good, I called it right. If it hurt, I ran from it. But folks, pain has a way of catching up to you. It always does. And you see, when it did, I didn't have the strength to face it. Because I didn't believe in anything higher than myself. Listen, any atheist can talk about reason and logic, but deep down, they're running from meaning. And why? Because meaning implies obligation, and obligation implies someone to whom you owe your life. And I didn't want that. So I built this life that looked successful on the outside, but it was empty on the inside. And that emptiness, it was loud. And every time I tried to fill it, it just made more noise. I don't care what it was, work, distraction, money, pride, all of it dulled the pain for a moment. But then it would come back even stronger. And finally, one day I realized that I wasn't chasing happiness anymore. I realized I was chasing escape. And that's what happens when you make happiness your God. Because it's going to demand everything from you and it will give nothing back. God in his mercy, let my false God fail. He took away what I thought I needed most, which was my control. He took away what I thought I needed most, which was control. And he let me fall apart, not to punish me though, but to reveal the truth. The real place, that real peace doesn't come from getting what you want, but from belonging to the one who made you. You see, that's when these lessons started hitting me hard. Because God doesn't want you happy. He wants you holy. And I know that sounds harsh at first when you hear it. Because every time somebody hears it, they think, what kind of God? And I know that sounds harsh when you hear it at first. Because anytime somebody hears that, they think, what kind of God doesn't want me to be happy? But you're missing the point. Because God wants something better than happiness. He wants your transformation. He wants your soul. Because happiness depends on what's happening around you. And holiness depends on who's inside you. Your happiness is going to change with every circumstance. But what holiness does is it changes your heart. And God is not interested in temporary smiles. What he's interested in is eternal souls. And to make you holy, he'll do whatever it takes to detach you from these idols that keep you from him, even if that means breaking the things that you think make you happy. And that's not cruelty. That's love in its purest form. Because only when the false gods die can you finally see the true one. And when you live long enough without God, you start to notice that every pleasure ends in the same silence. Every single distraction burns out, every new thing becomes old, and when all the noise is gone, what's left is the question you've been avoiding. What am I living for? What am I living for? And that's the question that God used to start working on me. Because he let me feel an emptiness that I couldn't lie to myself anymore. He let me feel the emptiness until I couldn't lie to myself anymore. And when you finally face that, you're going to realize that happiness isn't the goal. It's actually the bait. Because what it does is it lures you to the edge until you're ready to ask for something real. And that is where holiness begins. And holiness is hard because it asks everything of you. And holiness is hard because it asks everything of you. It doesn't flatter you. It doesn't make excuses for you. It burns, but it also purifies. Because what it does is it strips away everything that's fake until only the truth remains. And that's the kind of life that God wanted for me. Not an easy life, not a comfortable life, but a meaningful life. And I can tell you now, as someone who's chased everything else, there is nothing, absolutely nothing more peaceful than belonging completely to God. So when you hear me say this, when you hear me say that God doesn't want you happy, I don't want you to think that he's cold. I want you to think of a surgeon. You know, a surgeon will cut you to heal you. And God does the same thing to you. He allows the wound so that the poison can drain out. And he lets you fall so that you can finally reach out for his hand. And when you do, that's when you start to understand what love actually is. Love is not a feeling. Love is not love. I don't care what this generation keeps saying about it. Love is sacrifice. It's a decision that you give yourself to someone greater than yourself. And that is what God wants. It's not hard. He doesn't want your temporary comfort. He wants your eternal soul. And that is why happiness can never be enough. And that is also why holiness always will be. You know, once you see how fragile happiness is, you're going to start to notice how hard the world works to keep you chasing it. Every single ad, every show, every voice, every feed that comes up on your social media, every voice says the same thing. Do what makes you happy. Follow your heart. Be true to yourself. And I know it sounds harmless. It sounds inspiring, but it is poison. Because the heart without grace doesn't lead you to God. It leads you straight back to yourself. And that is the lie that has built this modern culture. That the purpose of life is somehow self-fulfillment. That you're supposed to craft your own meaning and decide your own truth and then define your own morality. But none of that, none of those things will lead to peace. They lead to chaos. When we replace God's commandments with feelings, when we replace duty with desire, and now we live in this generation that doesn't know what's right. They only know what feels good. And that is why marriages collapse. That is why families fall apart. That's why the church struggles to hold the line, because everyone is chasing what makes them happy, even if it means breaking what makes them holy. And today's world and the world's gospel today says you deserve it. But that's not what Christ said. Christ said, deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. Two gospels, two masters. And you can't serve them both. The world is going to promise happiness, but it will never deliver it. Because happiness without truth always rots in regret. It's going to tell you that sin is freedom. It tells you obedience is oppression. It tells you indulgence is love. But I want you to look at the results. Look at the world. Anxiety is at record highs. You've got depression that is swallowing entire generations. You've got broken families. You've got empty souls pretending that they're fine behind smiling selfies. You got empty souls pretending that they're fine behind smiling selfies. And if happiness was the goal, then the world should be perfect by now. We've given people everything they wanted, and they're somehow more miserable than they've ever been. We've given people everything they wanted, and they're more miserable now than ever because they are starving for what they've been made for, God. And you can't feed a soul with pleasure. The world treats holiness like it's a burden. And it tells you it's outdated, that it's rigid, that it's lifeless. But holiness is the only thing that can save this dying culture. I mean, our technology is advanced, but our hearts are sick. We have endless comfort, but no peace. We have knowledge without wisdom. We have power without restraint. We have pleasure without purpose. And in all of that noise, the quiet voice of God still says, "Be holy, for I am holy." He doesn't say, "Be happy." He says, "Be holy." And that is because happiness fades. And the world continues to confuse the two because it's calling pleasure joy and it calls comfort peace. But look, joy is not comfort. It is contentment in suffering. And peace also isn't silence. It's trust in the storm. And that's what the world don't understand. God does not hand you peace. He shapes it into you. And shaping hurts. That's why holiness is hard. Because it's not something that you feel. It's something that you become. And every generation has to choose. And you're either going to live for the applause of men or the approval of God. You're either going to let your feelings rule you. You either let your feelings rule you. You're either going to let your feelings rule you, or you're going to let the truth discipline you. And I know the world will call you extreme. The world will call you extreme for choosing holiness. It will call you judgmental for believing in sin. It will call you unhappy because you refused a bout of pleasure. So what? Let them. They called Christ worse than that. And our goal isn't to fit in. Our goal is to be faithful. And here's the real irony. When you finally stop chasing happiness and you start chasing holiness, you will find joy. And you'll find not the kind that fades. And you'll find joy. Not the kind that fades, but the kind that survives the storm. That's the joy that all the saints had. That's why they could smile in prison. That's why they could sing in suffering. And that is why they could die with peace. Because they didn't chase comfort. They were chasing Christ. So holiness isn't the enemy of happiness. It's the only kind that lasts. So when you hear the world today say, follow your heart, God says, follow my son. God says, follow my son. And these two roads don't meet. Because if you follow your heart, it's going to lead you in circles. But if you follow Christ, will lead you home. And that's the truth that the world can't stand. Because holiness exposes the lie. And it shows that happiness is built. It also shows that happiness built on sin is just a pretty cage. And the only way out of that cage is surrender. Look, you can't save yourself by being comfortable. And you can't heal your soul with pleasure. And you can't know peace until you bow before the Prince of Peace. That's the world's lie. And it's still killing people by the millions. And the only cure for it is holiness. And that's why God doesn't want you happy. He wants you free. And freedom only comes through holiness. There are moments that change you forever. When everything stops and you realize that you are not in control of anything. Now for me, that moment came when my son John was diagnosed with this tumor in his wrist. And it's hard to describe what happens inside of a father when he hears that kind of a news. It's hard to describe what happens inside of a parent when they hear that kind of news. But the world goes quiet and your thoughts immediately scatter. Every single ounce of strength you thought you had disappears. And you'd give anything, you'd do anything, you would give anything, you would do anything to make it go away. Look, I faced combat. I seen fear up close. Look, I faced combat. I've seen fear up close, but nothing prepares you for watching your own child suffer. And that's when you learn what real helplessness feels like. I remember sitting there with him, holding his little hand, thinking, why would God allow this? And at that point in my life, I still didn't fully understand who God was. I believed in him at that time, but I didn't trust him. And there's a difference. And there's a difference. I wanted a God who made life easy. But I'm sorry, God doesn't promise that. He promises salvation, not comfort. And sometimes salvation comes through suffering. And that's a truth that no one wants to hear. We want a God who fixes things, not a God who forms us through pain. But pain has a way of forcing your faith out of your head. But pain has a way of forcing your faith out of your head and into your heart. And when you're broken, you stop debating God and you start clinging to him. And that's what I did. We prayed. And when I say we prayed, I don't mean polite prayers. I mean desperate prayers. I mean the kind that shake you, the kind that strip away all pride. Lord, please heal him. Take me instead. And every night I'd watch John go to sleep and I wondered, what was God doing? Was he testing me? Was he punishing me? Was he even listening to me? And those questions right there will haunt every believer at some point. And the truth about it is that these are not bad questions if you let them lead you to surrender. Because I've also learned that God's not offended by an honest question. He is offended by pride. And your pride dies when you got nowhere left to turn but to him. And so weeks went by and the waiting felt like it was endless. And we did the scans, we did the follow-ups. And then came that visit to the doctor. The tumor's gone. Just gone. And then came that meeting with the doctor. She said, what did you do? I didn't do nothing. Like what? She goes, it's changed. We can just take this out. And the doctor couldn't explain it, but I can. God healed my son. And in that moment, I knew everything had to change. Because when you beg God for a miracle and he answers you, you can't keep living like you used to. You realize then you owe him everything. I owed him. I owe him my son's life. And all I have to offer is mine. And that's the moment that faith became real. Not a belief in theory, but trust in practice. I understood then that God doesn't always stop the storm. Sometimes he'll walk you through it and he'll show you who he is. Sometimes he'll walk you through that storm and he'll show you exactly who he is. He doesn't remove suffering to prove his love. He uses it to deepen yours. And so when John was healed, it wasn't just his wrist that was restored. It was my soul. God had used that trial to perform a surgery on me. He cut out the arrogance. He cut out the illusion of control, the self-reliance, all of that had blinded me for years. And I finally saw what I'd been missing all along. That faith is not about getting what you want from God. It's about giving what you owe to God. And what do we owe him? Everything. Our time, our obedience, our gratitude, our lives. That's what it means to be holy. To live as though every breath you got is borrowed. Because it is. Every time I look at my son, I'm reminded of that. He's not just my child. He's my testimony. Proof that God still works miracles. Even in this world that's forgotten how to believe. And so when you see God heal your child, there is no going back to casual faith. You can't treat worship like routine. You can't pray like it's a box to check. You start seeing life as an altar, and every decision becomes an offering. Every trial becomes a test of trust, and that's where holiness begins. In gratitude that refuses to fade. So when I say that I owe God my son's life, I mean it. I mean it every single time I kneel before the altar, because I don't just remember the healing. I remember the fear. I remember the helplessness. And I remember the mercy that followed. I remembered what it felt like to realize. I remember what it felt like to realize that God didn't owe me anything and still gave me everything. And that's the kind of love that'll break you. That's the kind of love that will change you. And so when people ask me why I'm so devoted, why I take my faith so seriously, I tell them it's because I've seen what God can do when you surrender. I felt the weight of his mercy. I owe him my son's life, and that means I owe him mine. And that's not emotionalism either. That's truth. That is holiness in motion. That is surrender. And that's where everything else in my life began to change. Because when my son was healed, I knew God was real. But I didn't know where to go from there. I mean, I'd seen his mercy, I'd felt his power, but I didn't know how to worship him. And that's the question that every convert faces at some point. Now that I believe, what do I do with this faith? How do I honor a God who's gave me everything? How do I honor a God who gave me everything? And at first I thought that the answer was just going to be go to church, find a place, sit in the pew, pray, sing. Find a place, sit in the pew, pray, sing, repeat. But something inside me felt restless. With that, because something was missing. And it wasn't disbelief. It was just a hunger for reverence. I wanted to know how to properly give thanks to the God who healed my son. And deep down, I knew that casual worship could not possibly be enough. And deep down, I knew that casual worship could not possibly be enough. And that was when I discovered the traditional Latin Mass. And I want to be clear here. I didn't grow up with it. I didn't even know what it was. So if you had mentioned to me 6 years ago anything about the Latin Mass, I would have shrugged it off. I wouldn't have known what you were talking about. So it wasn't nostalgia that drew me to it. It was just desperation for the truth. And when you've seen the power of God firsthand, you stop wanting a faith that entertains you. Because when you've seen the power of God firsthand, you stop wanting faith that entertains you. And you start craving a faith that will humble you. The first time I ever walked into a Latin Mass, I didn't understand a word that was being said. The language was foreign. The rhythm was different. The silence was deep. But in that silence, I felt something I had never felt in a modern church service. I felt the presence of God. Not in some loud emotional way, but in a heavy, unmistakable stillness. The kind of silence that demands reverence. And the kind of reverence that demands humility. Because it wasn't about me anymore. And for the first time, I felt right. When the priest processed in, he didn't face us. He faced the altar. And in that little simple act, I realized something very profound. He wasn't there to perform for me. He was there to lead us all toward Calvary. And he wasn't speaking to us. He was offering the Son for us. And that realization broke me. Because for the first time, I saw that worship was not a service to me, but as a sacrifice to God. And that's when it hit me. That is what I had been missing. The reverence, the stillness, the humility, and the sense that something truly sacred was happening right before my eyes. Something that was older, higher, holier than anything I could imagine. I didn't need to understand Latin. I did understand the posture. I understood the silence. And I also understood it wasn't about preference. It was about presence. And that's what made me stay. Because every time I'm at Latin Mass, I am reminded that the world, every time I'm at the Latin Mass, I am reminded that the world has made faith too easy. We have replaced sacrifice with sentiment, reverence with routine, holiness with habit. But you see, the Latin Mass doesn't allow for that. It confronts you with the reality of who God is and who you are not. It doesn't cater to your comfort. It calls you to conversion. And many people think I go to the Latin Mass because I prefer it. They'll say things like, oh, you just like the old ways, or you think your way is right. How in the world could I be nostalgic for something I never knew? I don't go to it because it's old. I go to it because it's timeless. It connects me to the same worship that the saints knew, the same sacrifice that they died defending, and the same altar where Christ himself is made present. Because it connects me to the same worship that the saints knew, the same sacrifice that they died defending, and the same altar where Christ himself is made present. That's not nostalgia. That's truth. And when you walk into the Latin Mass, you realize that the same Christ who healed the sick and raised the dead is right there. He's hidden under the veil of the Eucharist. And the same hands that healed my son are raised again at the altar. The same blood that fell from the cross is in that chalice, and I can't stand in the presence of that reality. The same blood that fell from the cross is in that chalice, and I cannot stand in the presence of that reality without being changed by that. What would make an atheist, somebody who mocked religion, who thought faith was weakness, go in the hardest? What would make an atheist, somebody who mocked religion, somebody who thought faith was weakness, all of a sudden go all in for the hardest, most demanding form of the worship that the church offers? Not emotion, not aesthetics, truth. And once you've seen truth himself, once you've stood before that altar and realized that heaven touches earth, you can't go back to the easy version of faith. I'm not saying that the Latin Mass didn't make me Catholic, but it made me reverent. And it taught me that God doesn't just deserve belief, he deserves awe. He deserves silence. He deserves our best effort, even when we fall short. And that's what changed me. I realized that everything I had chased before, success, comfort, approval, all of that was worthless compared to this. Because it's not about what I got from God. Because this wasn't about what I got from God. It was about what I could finally give to him. And that is what holiness looks like. It's not convenience. It's surrendered. And when I walked out of that first Latin Mass, I didn't just feel moved by it. I felt convicted by it. I knew I finally found a place where I could give everything back. The place where gratitude becomes sacrifice and faith becomes love in action. That's what drew me in. Not nostalgia, not preference, reverence. Because when you owe God your son's life, you stop asking for comfort and you start asking for ways that you can repay love with love. And that is how an atheist finds his altar. Not by chasing what feels good, but by kneeling before what is true. And you'd be surprised how many people think that the traditional Latin Mass is about personal taste. They say, oh, you just prefer it, like you're like a Latin nerd or something. They say it like you picked the flavor of ice cream. They say it like I picked the flavor of ice cream. But let's be honest about this. Would anyone say that about the saints? Would you tell Padre Pio? Would you tell Padre Pio, who bore the wounds of Christ and wept at the altar, that he was just being picky? Would you tell St. John Vianney, who spent 16 hours a day in the confessional and offered the old rite with tears, would you tell him he's simply nostalgic? Would you tell St. Maximilian Kolbe, that died in a starvation bunker singing hymns to Our Lady, that his reverence was a preference? Of course not. And that's because the saints knew what worship really is. It isn't about comfort. It isn't about taste. It's about sacrifice. And that's why I go. Not because it's easy, but because it's hard. The Latin Mass demands silence in a world that never stops talking. And it demands focus in a culture that is addicted to distraction. It will call you to humility when everything around you screams for attention. And you cannot show up half-hearted. You can't coast through a Latin Mass because it'll pull you into something greater than yourself. Something older and holier than you could ever invent. The Mass is not a performance. It is the representation of the sacrifice of Calvary. And the priest doesn't face the people because he's not there to entertain us. He faces God because that's where the offering is going. And when he whispers the ancient prayers, he is standing between heaven and earth. He's speaking for the church. He's pleading for souls, and he's offering the body and blood of Christ for the living and the dead. Again, not nostalgia. That is theology in motion. Every gesture, every word, every moment of silence is deliberate. It's not designed to make you feel good. It's designed to make you holy. And that's what reverence does. It takes your eyes off of you and it fixes them on God. When I hear people talking today, they always talk about getting something out of Mass. Like, oh, I like this priest or I don't like that priest. But the saints never asked that question. They didn't go to Mass to get, they went to give. They went to give glory. They went to give thanks. They went to give their hearts to the one who gave his life. That's what worship means. It's a response. It's not a request. So if you walk into the Latin Mass and you expect to be entertained, you're going to be disappointed. But if you walk in ready to adore, you will never be the same. Because adoration changes you. It humbles you. It strips away pride, the way silence strips away noise. And it reminds you that you are a creature standing before your Creator. Now, I've heard people say, well, I don't understand Latin. Neither do I. I heard people say, I don't understand the Latin. Well, neither do I understand heaven, but I still want to go there. Because understanding isn't what makes worship holy. Love does. Reverence does. Obedience does. And when the church prays in the language of the saints, she's reminding us that God is not casual. That's his house. It's not a stage. That altar is not a table for coffee and conversation. It is the foot of the cross. You can't stand at Calvary and talk about preference. You fall to your knees, you beat your chest, and you whisper, Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner. That's the right posture of the soul. And that's why I go, because I need that reminder every single week. And every time I'm there, I think about what the world has done to worship, how it's been softened, how it's been simplified, how it's been shortened, all of it to make it easier. But let me say this. Love that costs nothing isn't love at all. Because love that costs nothing isn't love at all. And the Latin Mass asks something from you. It asks for your attentions. It asks for your patience. It asks for your humility. It asks you to kneel. It asks you to listen, to offer, to wait. That's why it's holy. Because holiness always requires effort. So no, I don't go because I think it's better. I go because it keeps me honest. And it reminds me that I'm not the audience. God is. And when the priest whispers the final prayer, when the incense fades, and when that silence returns, I know exactly why I'm there. Not to be moved, but to move closer to Him. Not to feel good, but to be made good. Not to watch, but to worship. That's not a preference. That's reverence. And reverence is exactly what God deserves. Every time I walk into a church, I am reminded of what I owe. And not what I think I owe, but what I truly owe. Because there's not a single time that I'm there kneeling and watching the priest raise the host up that I don't realize I owe him my son's life. That thought never fades. It lives in the back of my mind like a heartbeat. And when the bells ring, I see John's face. When the chalice is lifted up, I remembered the night I begged God to save him. And when I see the white host raised above the altar, I see the same hands that healed my boy. How could you ever be casual about that? How could I ever stand there distracted, checking my watch or whispering about what's next? No, I owe too much for that. The world talks about gratitude like it's a feeling. But again, gratitude isn't a feeling. It's a debt that you choose to pay every day. And that payment is obedience. And when you see what I've seen, you'll realize that every breath your child takes is a gift that you didn't earn. You realize that you have no claim on tomorrow. And that changes everything about how you worship. I used to think that worship was about emotion. And if the music moved me, I called that good. And if I felt nothing, I blamed the service. But now, when I'm at Mass, it's not about feeling. It's about offering. Because the Mass is not entertainment. It's repayment. It's where I place my life back on the altar and say, this is yours, Lord. It's where I place my life back on the altar and say, this is yours, Lord. You gave me everything, and I'm giving it back. Gratitude is not soft. It's hard, and it costs you something. Because if you're truly thankful, you'll change. You'll give, you'll serve, you'll kneel. That's what gratitude looks like when it matures. It becomes sacrifice. And then every Kyrie, every Sanctus, every drop of incense that rises up, every moment of silence is my offering of thanks. Every genuflection says, I remember what you did. Every sign of the cross, I still belong to you. That's why I go to Latin Mass. Because it gives me the space and the structure to give him everything back. It demands my full attention. It refuses to let me coast through the motions. And it keeps me honest before God. And the truth is we don't thank God enough. I mean, we thank him when things go our way, but how often do you thank him when he corrects you, when he disciplines you, when he strips away everything that keeps you far from him? You see, that's gratitude too. And that's the kind that hurts at first, but it saves you in the end. And when you start thanking God for the pain as well as the healing, that's when holiness begins. Because now you're just acknowledging his gifts. Because now you're not just acknowledging his gifts, you're trusting his will. And that's what I learned from John's healing. Gratitude's not just saying thank you, it's living thank you. And it changes the way you talk, the way you work, the way you pray, the way you treat people. It's putting God first because you finally understand what he's worth. Every time I'm in that pew, I think about the difference between what I deserve and what I've been given. And it humbles me because truth is, I didn't deserve that miracle. I didn't earn it, but I received it. And now I live in debt to mercy. And that's a debt I'll never repay. And that's exactly the point. Because God doesn't ask you for repayment. He asks you for remembrance. And he asks you to live like you know what he's done. That's why I kneel the way I do. That's why I keep my eyes fixed on the altar. Because gratitude doesn't lead you to reverence isn't gratitude. Because gratitude that doesn't lead you to reverence isn't gratitude. It's sentiment. And reverence is what gratitude looks like when it grows up. It's love turned into action. It's faith shaped by memory. It's worship. It's love turned into action. It's faith shaped by memory. It's worship born from awe. Because I've seen mercy with my own eyes. So when people ask, why are you so serious about your faith? I tell them the truth. Because I've seen mercy with my own eyes. I felt grace in my own hands. I owe my son's life to God, and I owe my own life in return. That's reality. That's the weight of grace. And that's the reason why I can never walk into a church like it's ordinary, because it's not ordinary. It's sacred ground. And that means giving more. It means kneeling longer. It means praying deeper. And if that means giving more, if that means kneeling longer, if that means praying deeper, so be it. Because I owe him everything. And gratitude demands nothing less. So can you repay him for giving his son for your ransom? No. And that's the point. You can't repay him. You can only respond. And when I say that, I mean it literally. You cannot outgive God. You can't outlove him. You can't even fully understand what he gave up to save you. But you can live like you know it happened. You can live like it matters. You can live like a man who's been rescued, because that's exactly what you are. Rescued. We were born owing a debt we could never pay. And our sin was the chain, and our pride was the lock, and death was the sentence. And then came Christ. The only one without debt, the only one without sin, and he stepped in and he paid that bill himself. That's what ransom means. And he didn't pay with words. He didn't pay with gold or silver. He paid with flesh and blood. He paid with his back torn open, with his head crowned with thorns, and his hands and feet nailed to wood, and he did it willingly. And he didn't ask if you'd be grateful for it. He didn't wait for you to deserve it. He saw your sin, and he loved you anyway. And that's the part that should stop you in your tracks, because no one else would have done it. No one else could have done it. So think about this. Christ didn't climb up that hill for righteous. So think about this. Christ did not climb that hill for the righteous. He climbed it for the broken, for the doubters, for the sinners, for the proud, for the faithless, for people like me and you. He saw every sin you'd ever commit. He saw every sin you'd ever commit, and he still went. He saw every failure, every denial, every lukewarm prayer, and he still went. That's love without condition. That is mercy. That is mercy without measure. That's mercy without measure. So no, you can't repay him. But you can stop insulting that sacrifice by living like it means nothing. And you can stop treating grace like it's a safety net and start treating it like it's a calling. You can stop using mercy as an excuse and start using it as a motivation. Because mercy that's understood demands change. So if your life isn't happy, that doesn't mean God forgot you. It means he's forming you. And that's something that few people understand anymore. We live in a culture that confuses pain with punishment. Because sometimes pain is preparation. And sometimes suffering is the only tool sharp enough to carve pride out of the human heart. God does not waste suffering. He uses it. He uses it to purify you, to detach you from what you will. He uses it to purify you, to detach you from what will rot, to teach you what actually matters. That's why he doesn't promise happiness. He promises holiness. And holiness almost always starts in discomfort. Christ did not say, "Follow me and I'll make you happy." He said, "Deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me." That's not cruel. That's clarity. The world says you should be comfortable. You'll never meet a holy person who lived an easy life. And you'll never meet a saint who thought holiness was optional. The world will tell you should be comfortable, and Christ will say you should be crucified. That's not dramatic. That's the truth of discipleship. And when you look at your life and you think, why is this so hard? Remember this. He's not trying to destroy you. He's trying to sanctify you. And he's not trying to take joy away from you. He's trying to give you joy that cannot be stolen. And joy and happiness are not the same thing. Happiness depends on what you have. And joy depends on who you serve. Happiness ends when comfort ends. Joy endures through every storm because it's anchored in God, not circumstances. And that is why the saints could sing in prison. That's why they could smile in pain. That's why the saints could sing in prison. That's why they could smile in pain and forgive while they were dying. They weren't happy. They were holy. And holiness made them free. So stop asking what you can get from God and start asking what you can give him. Give him your time. Give him your attention. Give him your sins. Give him your obedience. Give him your reverence. Give him your life. Because he already gave you his. And when that priest lifts up that host, and when the priest lifts up that host, you are watching heaven open. You're watching the eternal exchange. You are watching the eternal exchange. The Son offering himself to the Father for you. And that's the moment to give everything back. Kneel, pray, and adore. You cannot repay him for that. But you can give him everything you have left. So don't settle for less. Don't settle for temporary comfort when eternal joy is on the table. So don't settle for less. Don't settle for a God who fits your plans. Serve the God who gave his Son for your ransom. You were not made for shallow pleasure. You were made for eternal purpose. That's the call of holiness, and that's the road to peace. That's what it means to be truly alive. Because in the end, God doesn't want your comfort. He wants your conversion. And he doesn't want your happiness. He wants your heart. And when he finally has it, you'll know the difference. That's holiness. And that is where real joy begins. In nomine Patri et Filii et Spiritui Sancti.
Thank you for listening to Veritate. If you would like to contact the show, please email us at veritate@yahoo.com. That's veritate@yahoo.com. Thanks again, and we look forward to hearing from you. May God bless you all.